Hi everyone, this is Jess Findlay. I'm a professional nature photographer based in Vancouver, BC, Canada, and today I thought I'd give you a little bit of a tip on how to selectively reduce the noise in your images in Adobe Photoshop. So here we have an image of a bar-tailed godwit that I shot up in Alaska, and what we're going to try to do is remove the noise that we have in the background of the image. If I zoom in here, you can see that based on using ISO 800 on a Canon 7D Mark II, we have a little bit of noise going on in the background, which isn't all that desirable. So we want to get rid of that from the image. What you can do if you're working in Adobe Camera Raw is you could go over here to the Detail tab and you could apply some noise reduction here by dragging this slider up. And you can see that as we drag that slider further and further, it's doing a great job of smoothing out that background and getting rid of that noise. But what starts to happen as well is it smooths out the bird's plumage, which really gets rid of a lot of that sharpness that we've worked so hard to achieve by using a suitable setting, and we've spent all this money on expensive lenses that we don't really want to completely just wipe out all of that detail. So instead, what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this adjustment and we're going to work on this file in Photoshop. And I'm going to show you how we can apply that adjustment a lot more selectively just to the areas that we want it within Photoshop. So if we click back here, you can see I've done some small tweaks to the file. We're ready to go in Photoshop. So I'm going to cancel out of this and we've got a file all ready to go. So now we're in here in Photoshop, and what we're going to do is figure out a way to apply that noise reduction very selectively. So first things first, we're going to highlight our background layer. I'm going to press Command J, or if you're on a PC, Control J, and that's going to give us a new layer to work on. So what I'm going to do, just so we're on the same page, I'm going to name this layer noise reduction so we know what we're doing here. If we zoom in on this image, we've processed it up, it's looking great, however we're still seeing that noise. So now we have to figure out a way in Photoshop to do that selectively. What you could do is go up here to Filter and come down to the noise setting here and go down to Reduce Noise. But what that's going to do is I find personally that even while using a fairly aggressive noise reduction setting on there, it still leaves some noise in the background and it starts to actually introduce some pretty strange sort of pixelation and the colors start to bleed into one another. I don't really like using that in Photoshop. I don't find it does a great job. So what I'm going to do instead is go up here to Filter again, and I'm going to select what's called the Camera Raw filter. This is new for Adobe Photoshop CC. And what it does, you'll see here, is it allows you, if we click on this, to go back to the Camera Raw interface and work from there. So what we're going to do is just like we were doing before, we can zoom in here to see how the noise is doing. We click on that same adjustment that we were looking at, and we can use that luminance slider and we can drag that up until we start to see that noise disappearing. There's what's called the luminance detail slider right below, and we know that there is no detail in this part of the image to begin with, so we don't need any detail. So we can drag that down and that's going to smooth things out even further. So now you can see we're left with a really smooth background. We don't really have much noise to speak of there. It's really cleaned things up nicely. But as you can see, we're still left with this really, really soft plumage that lacks that detail that we had to begin with. So here's where we can use some further techniques to apply that only to this area. So let's go ahead and click OK, and that's going to bring us back into Photoshop having made that adjustment just to this layer. So basically now what we want to do next is we want to have that adjustment applied here, and we want to be able to basically erase it from the bird itself. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to apply a layer mask to this layer, and by clicking this little guy below, we can add a layer mask. If you're not familiar with using layers and masks, I highly recommend that you check out some videos here on YouTube to familiarize yourself with this technique. There's a great video done by my friend Glenn Bartley. I'll put a link here so you can check it out and you'll be up to speed with what we're going to do next. So for those of you who are familiar with using layer masks, we can continue on here and show you what we're going to do next. So we want to have our brush tool selected here on the left side, And we want to ensure that we have the layer mask selected on the right hand side here. And we can see down here at the bottom we have a white swatch and a black swatch. We want to make sure that this is set to the white swatch, so the white should be the color that's showing through on top. Now what we want to do to get rid of that adjustment that we made to the image, we want to basically delete it from the whole shot and then just paint it back into areas that we want it to apply. So what we'll do next to get rid of it from the entire image is we will hold the command button and the delete button at the same time. Or if you're on a PC, that will be the control and the delete button. So I'll do that now, and you can see we've gotten rid of that adjustment and it's not being applied to any part of the image. What we want to do next is go in and make a selection of the area that we want that noise reduction to apply to. We could painstakingly go in and start to paint all around these edges, paint all of this background, and bring that adjustment back in. As we see here, we could go in and start to really paint everything in, and it's going to take ages, and you have to be very, very precise around these edges so it doesn't overlap. There's a much easier way of doing things, which is going to be using a tool to make a selection. The tool that I use for this job is the Magic Wand tool. So if we go up here and select the Magic Wand tool, this will pop up. There's a little thing up on the top here called the tolerance. Now the higher number you apply the tolerance, the less refined that selection will be. So if you set that all the way up to 100, it's going to be quite a broad selection. Whereas if you have it on a lower number, say something like 15, it's going to do a better job of really narrowing down the selection and refining it to be very close in to these edges of the bird. So what we're going to do is click on the image, and you can see that it started to make our selection. Now in order to add more to this selection, you hold down the shift button and you can continue to click. And you can see here it's doing a great job of identifying where the edge of the bird intersects with the background. This is a great image because we have a bird that's very isolated against the background, making this selection process quite easy. So let's fast forward here to when we have it all selected. Okay, so now we can see that the Magic Wand tool has done a great job of selecting this whole area around the bird, anywhere basically where we don't have sharpness within the image where we want to apply that noise reduction. It's been quite good at selecting around even the most detailed areas of feathers, but what I like to do is I like to come up here to the Refine Edge tool. Now let's click on that. And we have a whole bunch of different adjustments here. You only really need to worry about one or two of these. I only use a few of these regularly, and the first one I'm going to show you is the Shift Edge tool. Now what I like to do is just drag this down a little ways, and that's going to basically just give me a little bit more of a buffer around the bird and allow there to be a little more space in between where the bird's feathers start, so we're not really overlapping with that noise reduction and causing a loss of sharpness along the edge. Now the next one that I use is the feather. And if I put this to around 1.5-ish, something like that, I find that that usually does a pretty good job of just creating a little bit more of a graduated look to this edge, so it's not such a stark line in between what has been noise reduced and what is not. So I'll click OK, and we can see that we're starting to see a little bit more of a buffer there. Now, similar to what we did before, which was pressing that Command Delete to get rid of that adjustment from the entire layer, what we'll do now is if we flip this swatch to black, and again we hit that Command Delete, all of a sudden you see that it's applied that adjustment, but only to the areas that we've selected. It's not doing anything to the bird's plumage. We still have that nice sharpness. So we can see there's a huge difference. All of a sudden we've really cleaned up this area, but we've retained all that detail. What I like to do is zoom in, and I like to toggle this layer on and off to make sure that I haven't made any mistakes. Now you can see up here where there's a little less contrast in the bird's plumage, we're starting to see some overlapping. So what I'll do is I'll just come in here with the brush tool, and I'll just use a very small brush, and I'll start to sort of clean up some of those edges. And I'll do this all the way around the bird wherever it needs some extra attention. as well as down here with the water. You want to make sure that it makes sense what's sharp and what isn't, so you might have to go back in here and start to smooth things out a little bit. So what this really comes down to is just attention to detail and learning how to use the magic wand tool in combination with layer masking. I really believe that this is the best technique for selective noise reduction in these sorts of images, so I hope this has been helpful. If you have any questions about this technique or post-processing in general, feel free to leave me a comment. Or if you'd like to learn more about post-processing nature images, I do offer lessons via Skype. Again, thanks for watching, guys. Until next time.